Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 27th of March. I'm Erin Viner, and this is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. The Nazareth District Court today indicted a Golan Heights Druze resident on charges of spying for the Syrian government. Sidki al-Makd of Majd al-Shams is accused of passing photographs and written reports on IDF positions near the northern border to Syrian intelligence officials. The 48-year-old suspect is a former security prisoner who was released in 2012 after serving 27 years in prison for numerous previous convictions, including contact with foreign agents. His most recent arrest follows a lengthy investigation by the Shin Bet security, who also detained two other Druze men from the area, Atef Darwish and Fida al-Shair. Investigators say that al-Makd is cooperating and has openly admitted most of the charges, including his renewed passing of information that he collected on army activity, including material that he personally passed to Syrian governmental agents, as well as documentation that he uploaded online that was later broadcast on Syrian television. Police described the suspect as an extreme nationalist who supports the Hezbollah terror organization in Lebanon, Iran, and Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. And they say he immediately resumed anti-state activity after his release from prison. The Syrian Foreign Ministry has already sent a letter to the United Nations Security Council and the UN Human Rights Council demanding al-Makd's release. In the second day of an Arab military alliance led by Saudi Arabia attempting to rescue the regime of Yemeni President Abd Rabbu Mansour Hadi, the Gulf Kingdom bombed the northern stronghold of the Shiite Houthi rebels and other key military installations in Yemen today. The military action is turning the impoverished and chaotic Arabian Peninsula nation into a new front in the rivalry between Sunni heavyweight Saudi Arabia and Shiite power Iran, which is supporting the insurgents. Military officials say that the massive aerial bombardment earlier today targeted the Houthi stronghold in Sa'ada, particularly locations where the group's leader Abdul Malik al-Houthi is believed to be. Saudi warplanes also bombed the Al-Sana army camp in the Al-Harb region northeast of the capital Sana'a, maintained by commanders who remain loyal to former President Ali Abdullah Saleh. Other strikes reportedly focused on military camps in the Al-Dail and Laj provinces, including the Al-Anad base, where about 100 U.S. military advisors were withdrawn just last weekend due to the deteriorating security condition. Saudi Arabia and fellow Sunni-led allies in the Gulf and the Middle East view the Houthi takeover as an attempt by Iran to establish a proxy on the kingdom's southern border. Iran is denying that it has provided weapons to the insurgents, although it has admitted to offering diplomatic and humanitarian support. Well, the conflict in Yemen clearly has broader implications for the Sunni-Shiite relations throughout the Middle East. Analyst and research scholar Catherine Zimmerman of the nonpartisan American Enterprise Institute on Public Policy in Washington, D.C. says that U.S. policy in the region is incoherent.
The outbreak of conflict in Yemen, despite being a local conflict, is part of a broader sectarian war that is ongoing in the Middle East. We saw it become a hot war in Iraq and Syria. And the Saudis and the Gulf states are very aware of the threat that they see Iran posing to them as a Shia state. The reason why Yemen is so important is because it historically has not been a sectarian country. And the Iranian position, which has grown in Yemen over the past couple of weeks and months, is much stronger and therefore much more of a threat to the Sunni states in the region. The al-Houthi expansion southward has driven support for al-Qaeda, not ideological, but simply practical support for the group, since it's seen as being a front against the al-Houthis. The problem now is, as the conflict becomes increasingly sectarian, we're going to see it playing off a more radical region. There is growing support for ISIS in Yemen, where fundamentally the Yemeni people don't support radical Islam. So Yemenis themselves are wrestling with the idea that ISIS could gain a foothold in their country. U.S. policy does not seem to be treating the region as a whole and understanding of the regional dynamics, but is looking and making policy based purely on a local section. So we can treat Yemen differently than how we're treating Iraq, different than how we're treating Syria, even though we see Iraq and Syria as one conflict, and Yemen actually playing off of the Iraq-Syria conflict.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is meeting with Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif for the second consecutive day of the latest round of nuclear negotiations in Lausanne. The P5+1 nations are hoping to reach a detailed political understanding with the Islamic Republic by next Tuesday, in accordance with the party's self-imposed deadline. China, Russia, the United States, Germany, France, and Britain are focused on securing a long-term agreement by June that would remove sanctions against Tehran in return for the restriction of many of the most sensitive aspects of the country's atomic program. Leaders from Israel, Saudi Arabia, France, and even the U.S. Congress are raising concerns that the Obama administration may be willing to conclude a deal that would enable Iran to develop nuclear weapons capability in the future. U.S.-led coalition warplanes are continuing airstrikes against Islamic State forces in Iraq, hitting at least a dozen targets in Tikrit. U.S. officials say that the aerial defense came in support of the Iraqi forces who are fighting on the ground. The mainly Sunni city was seized by the radical ISIS jihadis in the first days of their lightning strike across northern Iraq last June. And if the Shiite-led government troops are able to recapture Tikrit, it would provide Baghdad with the momentum for a pivotal stage of the campaign to also possibly retake Mosul, which is the largest city in northern Iraq. Meanwhile, President Obama's special envoy to the coalition battling the Islamic State, retired General John Allen, told Congress that the U.S.-led effort is succeeding in weakening the group.
My engagement in each of these stops reinforced my confidence in the coalition strategy to counter ISIL across the informational, the physical, and the financial spheres in which it operates. In the territory ISIL has lost, in the increasing financial strain on the organization, and in the diminished morale and increasing desertions of its fighters, we're clearly degrading its capabilities. The allure of the so-called caliphate is under direct assault.
Turning now to national politics and the already troubled coalition talks, and one of the members of the Likud negotiating team, Knesset member Zev Elkin, said this morning that his party will do all that it can to bring Habayit Yehudi into the government. That was later echoed by his partner on the negotiating team, MK Yariv Levin, who emphasized that Naftali Bennett's party will be a central partner in the next coalition, and that rumors that the faction is not wanted are unfounded. Incoming Habayit Yehudi MK Inoon Magal announced, however, that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has yet to offer Bennett a ministerial role, and that he believes that the premier is looking to form a unity government with the Zionist Union Party, which is why the talks with his own party are dragging on. The first day of negotiations ended last night without any of the parties shaking hands on a deal, but with cautious optimism from most. Bennett's party is one of those exceptions, which was expressing frustration at not being given more attention from Netanyahu, while the new Kulanu faction canceled its session with Likud after members said that important economic portfolios were being given to ultra-Orthodox parties. And while many people believe that Netanyahu is pressing forward with his intention to build a narrow right-wing coalition, others believe that he may in fact form a national unity government with the Zionist Union. IBA's Ario Sullivan asked Professor Gil Troy of McGill University for his perspective.
Wait a minute, BB won? I was reading all these polls that said that Labour was going to win. You know, it's very complicated to predict Israeli politics, as the pollsters, even the exit pollsters, learned last week. And it seems to me that Netanyahu, if you can trust his word, which is always a big if, has made it very clear that he doesn't want to have another push-me-pull-you government. I mean, that was basically why he called this election. He was frustrated. He claimed that he couldn't lead properly because he had Yesh Atid in the government and he had too many alternative voices in the government. So I think he wants a right-wing government. He wants a coalition that he says is basically what was elected. But there are certain voices, I think especially President Rivlin, who's saying, you know what? There were different messages in the election. You got 25% of the Israeli electorate. You won by cannibalizing the right. You didn't really reach out to the center. And we heard thousands of people in this country, hundreds of thousands of people in this country saying, we want to have a social agenda. We want to have an economic improvements. We want to deal with housing. We don't just want to deal with all this negativity, and we don't want to be internationally isolated. How are you going to do that? And so that's the real question. We're stuck in the inside baseball of who's going to be in the coalition and who's going to get what Volvo and what position. But the more important question is, how are you going to lead? What's going to be your agenda?
Now, when the Likud started off, their first message in the election campaign was to change the electoral system. Do you think that's still going to be valid?
First of all, we saw some interesting things with the electoral system this time. For example, Yachad didn't get the Achuz Chasima, the minimum number of votes, and it disappeared. And I say goodbye to those yahoos. It's a good thing. We saw that the Israeli Arabs, what happened? A fascinating lesson, which I hope both Labor Zionist Union and Likud will learn. The Arab coalition said, wait a minute, in order to get a critical mass of votes, we've got to work together. And if you looked at that coalition, it ranged from left-wing to right-wing, Islamists, secularists, but they understood kind of the American lesson that we need a big tent. And one of the things that I think has to happen, and I'm not a smart enough political scientist, because I'm a historian, to know how to manipulate the system, and we've seen how much political scientists fail when they try. But if there was a way to push the two big parties to start building bigger, to learn from our Israeli Arab brethren, to learn from the tactics they used to understand that it's not healthy for the system to have Likud at 30 and Zionist Union at 24. They should be at 40, 50, ideally even 61. We shouldn't have this coalition government, but that's dreaming in Technicolor. It used to be that the two major parties would get a good chunk of 40, 50, 55 votes. And what mechanical change needs to occur is the question I'd be asking, and I don't have a good answer.
And yet still, there were times when they had 40 seats in Likud and Labor, and yet there were still kingmakers being the ones who decided if it's going to go to the left or to the right. Now, is there a place here? Do you see any kind of electoral reform push?
There are two big issues with the Israeli system. One is the political system itself, and two is Israeli society. So there is a problem that it's a society that doesn't have a strong consensus on many key things, and that's why going even back to the days of David Ben-Gurion and Menachem Begin, none of them ever got a majority, and there always was about the kingmakers, those small parties that could manipulate. What does that reflect? It might reflect certain flaws in the system. It also reflects a tribal society. It reflects a society that hasn't fully built and learned to build consensus. You've got Haredim, you've got Israeli Arabs, you've got far left, you've got far right, you've got people who don't want to work together, who never learned how to play in the sandbox and how to share. And that's a problem for the democracy. So in some ways, it has to be a two-pronged fight. One is there really should be an electoral reform commission looking at what's going on and what kind of changes can we have. But broader, we need leadership. We need the kind of leadership that President Ruby Rivlin has been offering, I'm happy to say. We also need leadership from the Prime Minister and from his coalition saying, we are one country, we have room for disagreement, we're democratic, we have lots of bandwidth, but we also have to have certain core consensus issues. We have to learn how to build, even within our parties, broader coalitions internally so that we can really lead effectively.
Outgoing United Nations Special Coordinator for the Middle East peace process, Robert Sari, expressed concern over Netanyahu's re-election as Prime Minister during his final briefing to the UN Security Council, while urging the 15-member body to take action to resolve the Israel-Palestinian conflict.
I am frankly concerned by many of the hardline statements put forward in the final days of campaigning, in particular remarks by the Prime Minister raising serious doubts about Israel's commitment to the two-state solution. I urge the incoming Israeli government to seize the opportunity of a fresh mandate, to quickly demonstrate in words and, more importantly, by actions, this commitment. As I have noted in my briefings to you, since May 2012, the parties are heading towards an outcome which I can only describe as a one-state reality. As the parties do not appear at this point ready to recommence negotiations, we should not rush them back to the table. If indeed we believe that they do continue to seek an outcome of two neighboring states living in peace and security, but are unable themselves at this juncture to agree on a meaningful framework to resume negotiations, the international community should seriously consider presenting such a framework for negotiations, including parameters, to achieve this. This may be the only way to preserve the goal of a two-state solution in the present circumstances. Peace is first and foremost the responsibility of the parties to the conflict, but that reality cannot absolve international institutions of their responsibilities. For its part, the Quartet has largely failed to live up to expectations, although recent efforts to reinvigorate it, including through an enhanced role for regional stakeholders, may have a positive impact. It remains the primary responsibility of this Council to play its role in developing a new peace architecture for resolving the conflict at long last. Security Council Resolution 242, embodying the key principle of land for peace, is nearly half a century old. During my tenure, In my first year, actually, the Council passed only 2 resolutions on Israel and Palestine, and neither of these provided a strategy. Hasn't the time come, Mr. President, for the Council to lead? I've, as an envoy, been asking myself at times, if I am pulling a dead horse. It's been 7 years I've been trying to achieve this 2-state solution, and I'm now leaving. I must tell you frankly, a bit disheartened in seeing what actually has happened in these 7 years, which forced me to even warn the Council since 2012 that in fact we were not heading towards a 2-state solution, but maybe to an outcome which I can only describe as a 1-state reality. Having said all that, even if you pull the dead horse, then you're looking for the other horse. Where's that other horse? I think this is what also the parties should understand, that if they wish to live in peace with each other, that there is no other alternative, and that it is really time then to rethink strategy, how to achieve a 2-state solution.
Turning to Argentina, where a federal appeals court has thrown out the case accusing President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner and other top officials of a major cover-up deal with Iran, giving a victory to an administration that has been rocked by the mysterious death in January of prosecutor Alberto Nisman, who initiated those allegations. In a 2-1 decision, the court upheld the February ruling by federal judge Daniel Rafecas to dismiss the case that he said failed to present a single element of evidence. That verdict was appealed by Nisman's successor, Gerardo Policita, who argued that a full investigation, including testimony from top officials, was necessary to evaluate the merits of the accusations. The latest court action can also be overturned if taken to Argentina's Court of Criminal Appeals. Nisman was found dead of a gunshot to the head 4 days after charging Kirchner with making a secret pact with Tehran in exchange for favorable trade deals to cover up involvement by several Iranian officials in the 1994 bombing of the Jewish Community Center that killed 85 people and wounded hundreds of others. The suspicious circumstances of Nisman's death have been questioned throughout the South American nation and are yet to be resolved. Well, investigators in Germany are now scouring the background of Andreas Lubitz, the young German co-pilot of Germanwings Flight 9525, who is believed to have intentionally brought down the aircraft in the Swiss Alps on Tuesday, killing himself and the other 149 passengers and crew aboard. Police were seen removing large bags of evidence, including Lubitz's computer, from his Dusseldorf apartment, as well as his parents' home in Montabaur, where a man covered by a jacket was also led out of the house into a van. French prosecutors announced that the black box recordings revealed that the 27-year-old pilot deliberately crashed the plane after locking the captain out of the cockpit. Security experts are now questioning German aviation policy that permits one pilot to remain in the cabin alone. Since the stunning announcement of Lubitz's actions, airlines in Canada, EasyJet, Norwegian Air Shuttle, and Air Berlin have already changed their rules to require a second crew member remain in the cockpit at all times, which is compulsory in the United States but not in Europe.
The locked cockpit doors and the strengthened cockpit doors came in as a consequence of 9/11 to prevent unauthorized people, hijackers, getting into the cockpit, taking the aircraft over and using it as an item of mass destruction. The failing here is only allowing one person in the cockpit at any one stage. I would either say it's an absolute rule that no matter what is happening, there should always be 2 people in the cockpit, or alternatively, if you do need to leave, then there should be someone else who is trained to fly or has a rudimentary knowledge that can come in and stand in. So there is always occupancy of 2 people.
Mark Zuckerberg is making headlines again with his ever-expanding Facebook empire and has just announced a new payments feature on the social media site, even as he battles the issue of restricted content. IBA reporter Alexander Jen has that story.
Helping people communicate more naturally with businesses is going to improve, I think, almost every person's life.
This includes Zuckerberg himself. His newest innovation for Facebook is to allow developers to create apps with an instant messenger, essentially creating apps within an app. We know Instant Messenger as a private messaging service on Facebook. Zuckerberg sees this as an opportunity to expand. His idea is to tap into the 600 million person user base and make Messenger a collective home base for other apps. 40 different apps will be available on Messenger in the coming days, ranging from restaurant booking to online purchases to e-card sharing.
Today, we're introducing a way for you to communicate with businesses right through Messenger.
But the question still remains whether Facebook users will want to shift their business transactions to a social media network like Facebook, especially when the site is currently under fire for regulation of content. Facebook has recently been fighting a battle over what content within posts should be prohibited due to issues with posts in support of violent militia groups and those containing nude photos.
I'm not somebody who would put up nude pics or violent stuff on Facebook, so it doesn't affect me as much. But I don't want to be too restricted in how I use it though.
The apps developed within Messenger shouldn't face the scrutiny that regular posting on Facebook may confront. However, users may hesitate to combine business transactions with more personal transactions via Messenger. No matter the outcome, Facebook continues to push the boundaries of communication, and that's something we can get on board with. Alexandra Jen for IBA News.
In local finance, the shekel today put in a mixed performance in trading against all major foreign currencies, and due to the closure of the stock market on Fridays, here's a look at the closing numbers for the week. The IBA weather team says to make plans to enjoy the last of our unseasonably warm temperatures tomorrow because we are expecting a relatively chilly start to the week. We're also going to see some haze and some strong winds tomorrow with the chance of light rain by evening. Here's the forecast abroad for over the next 24 hours. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. Hope that you'll tune in again tomorrow at the same time, same channel, when I'll be back to bring you the latest breaking news from Israel. I'm Erin Viner, wishing you a wonderful evening and Shabbat Shalom from Jerusalem.